So are we in the age of Indic Renaissance, or are we at the cusp of it?
I would say we are barely at the beginning of it. And I think there's a long way to go, because you see, over the last 3 or 4 years, conversations have been repeatedly and repetitively revolving only around the question of what the Marxists and, let's say, the Nehruvian coterie did to history in terms of distortion. I think that discussion is more or less done and dusted. Now I think it's time to implement an action and put out the work. Because after a point, it ends up taking the shape of endless victimhood, where there is let's say there is no value addition. So today, if someone tells me, why isn't that we aren't doing this in history? Why aren't we actually incorporating this as part of a knowledge system? I'd say, why don't you pose the question to the people in power? That's the audience to which this question must be aimed at. Unfortunately, we don't seem to be doing that. So I think now we are past the identification of the problem. Now the question is, what is the solution to address this particular problem? How serious are we about it? Is history, so when you look at, let's say, revisioning of history, it's not revisionism in that particular sense, but it is perhaps, as previous panelists put forth, presenting, let's say, a clear picture along with facts. But then it's not going to be limited to the realm of history alone. When you look at history, you're not going to be just limited to history of politics, but you're also going to be looking at history of education, history of culture, and whatnot, history of science in this country, so on and so forth. So that, I think, in that particular direction, NEP is perhaps a baby step of a baby step of a baby step. So
Why
let's
do you
see.
say that?
Because when the NEP came out, I clearly felt it was a half measure. The government was perhaps, and I'm not someone who can put myself in the shoes of the government, so I'm sure there are 108 considerations that they have in mind. But I believe that the government is constantly holding back its punches in this particular direction, either because of lack of confidence with respect to what it wishes to present, or because although it thinks that it is justified in the position that it wishes to take, it doesn't know how to respond to or parry the attacks from the usual suspects in the media and academic establishment. Therefore,
that's hardly any left.
No, I don't think so, ma'am. As someone who practices in the legal fraternity, take it from me, keep left is the principle still in several areas, not just when it comes to Indian roads. So I've seen that way too often. I do not want to suffer under the delusion that political victory translates to a shift in the academic Overton window or a shift in the cultural window. And dare I also say this, unfortunately, I think there is a certain degree of cultural continuity or historical continuity, even in the manner that this particular dispensation views at its own history. So when people read my books, they tend to assume that this is supposed to be some kind of a stick to beat the Congress with or the left with. Unfortunately, they've got it wrong. That's not what I'm trying to say. Both the left and the right, and the very existence of terms such as left and the right, points to the problem here, which is that we seem to lack originality and the confidence to draw from our own civilization. And that, I would say, equally afflicts the current establishment to a significant degree, but perhaps not to the degree that it afflicts the Congress establishment or the other political options that are available at this point. So I would say that no option today is ideal, and maybe that is always going to be the case. But I hope we start moving in a particular direction where, at the very least, we take incremental steps in addressing and correcting this particular position. Because you see, let me give you what exactly am I talking about. When it comes to issues such as caste and its nexus with Hindu Dharma, or its history in this particular country, the origin of untouchability, so on and so forth, I think it is political arithmetic that is dictating the course of how we wish to see history, as opposed to history dictating how politics should be redesigned. So therefore, on one hand, we end up constantly being told that caste is evil, caste is evil, caste is evil. Fantastic, then give up caste arithmetic altogether when it comes to elections. Why don't you walk the talk when it comes to this? So when it comes to your political arithmetic, you want to accept this particular reality, which means you have not been able to do away with it. But when it comes to history, it's almost as if we reduce that entire complex social system to something which the white man has given you to understand, and you start looking at your own social structures through the prism of, let's say, the received wisdom of that particular colonizer. So I think that is a problem that plagues the current dispensation as much as it did the previous dispensation. The only good part is this dispensation is perhaps a big tent of several non-left ideas, and therefore there are several alternative voices within this particular camp as well. So in that particular sense, perhaps the movement of 2014 to 2023 has been that for all practical purposes, Congress, or let's say what it represents, is no more the subject of the debate. The entire debate has shifted to this side. And now this side has multiple perspectives to argue and thrash out within itself. So there are some people who believe that Hindutva stands for Hindu modernity. And people like me effectively say, at the very least, have the guts and the confidence to junk this word called modernity because it has a very colonial undertone to it. Please understand its origins. And think of Hindutva as Hindu decolonization from a cultural and a psychological and a consciousness perspective. So that is the current debate. And I am of the conscious view that this particular debate will perhaps chart the course of the next 15 to 20 years at the very least. So we may not ultimately end with a situation where either side wins comprehensively, and it's not a victory in that particular sense, but you may end up with some kind of a hybrid outcome.